Welcome to the TotalABA Authorizations training video. The authorization feature in TotalABA allows you to record the authorization information provided by the insurance company and then track the authorization throughout its life cycle. To begin our lesson, we will first discuss the process for entering in the authorization information provided by the insurance company into the student record. The first step is to open up the student record and then ensure that the insurance contract has already been entered into the student record. Next, locate the Authorization section at the bottom of the student record and press the New Authorizations button. Many of the fields shown here are optional and only need to be entered in specific advanced scenarios. We will begin our discussion with only discussing the fields that are most common when entering authorizations. Later, we'll discuss the optional fields. The first required field on the authorization screen is the contract. Click the Lookup button next to the contract field and select the insurance contract for which you are entering the authorization. Next, we'll enter the authorization date range provided by the insurance company. For the next step, we'll enter the authorization number provided by the insurance company. The next field that we will discuss is the procedure code field. Note that the procedure code field does not have to be used for tracking authorizations. However, it is very common, so we'll discuss this field in detail. Leaving the procedure code field blank will allow you to track the authorization without tying it to any specific procedure code. However, oftentimes insurance companies do provide authorization information based on a specific procedure code. If that's the case, click the Lookup button next to the procedure code field and select the appropriate procedure code for which the insurance company authorized. If the insurance company provided an authorization for multiple procedure codes, then it is best to create a separate authorization for each procedure code. The one exception to that rule is when authorizations are provided for T codes. For example, if an insurance company provides an authorization for 0360T and 0361T, then we can use one authorization for that situation. The recommended method for tracking T codes is to select only the base code on the authorization. So in my example, the base code would be 0360T. Optionally, you may want to enter a comment in the comment field denoting that the authorization is for both 0360T and 0361T, as shown here. So in summary, the procedure code field on the authorization is optional. If you choose to use it, create a separate authorization for each procedure code unless using T codes. When using T codes, place the base code as the procedure code on the authorization and use the comments field to denote that the authorization is for both T codes. Later in this lesson, we will discuss the required step of attaching an authorization to an appointment. When a session is created from that appointment, the procedure code from the authorization entered here will automatically be coded on the session. When using T codes, the system will automatically place the base code on the session and the secondary code. So when using authorizations with procedure codes, the session in essence will code itself based on the authorization that is selected on the appointment. This will be demonstrated later in this video. Next, let's scroll down to the Authorized Unit section of the authorization. Here is where we will record the actual information provided by the insurance company that will be counted down as the authorization is used. In some scenarios, the insurance company will provide the authorization based on a number of visits. So for example, the student is authorized to come into your center 10 times between a specific date range. In other scenarios, they may provide a number of units. For example, the student may come in for 1,000 units of 0360T during a specific date range. Depending on how the authorization is provided will tell us which of these two fields to use. So if they provided the authorization based on a number of visits, then I would use the authorized visits field. So again, if they provided me with 10 visits during a specific date range, I'll enter a 10 in the authorized visits section. Now if the insurance company authorizes based on units, then we'll want to use the authorized minutes field. Note that authorized minutes is a time-based field, not a unit-based field. So we may need to do some math in order to determine the actual number of minutes to enter in this field. For example, if they provided us with 100 units, and the code that they provided the authorization for was a code where a unit is 30 minutes, then the authorized minutes would be 30 times the 100 units that they authorized, or 3,000 minutes. So in other words, take the units provided by the insurance company and multiply that number by the minutes per unit for the procedure code that they authorized. Now for the T code situation, you'll want to combine both T codes into the authorized minutes field. So in other words, take the units for the base code and add them to the units for the secondary code, multiply that number by the minutes per unit, and enter that in the authorization minutes section. So at this point, we've covered the most common fields on the authorization screen. In most cases, this authorization would be complete, and we'd save the authorization and then begin attaching that authorization to the appointments, which we'll cover soon. But first, let's discuss some of the optional fields here on the authorization screen. So let's move up to the billing provider field. This field is used if you have multiple billing providers in your center and the insurance authorizes for a specific billing provider. In that scenario, press the lookup button next to the billing provider field and select the appropriate billing provider. Note that by doing so, the billing provider on the session will automatically be defaulted to the billing provider selected here if this authorization is attached to the appointment. The appointment type field on the authorization is an optional field that is sometimes used to ensure that the appropriate authorization is selected when the appointment is created. For example, if your appointment types are set up in a manner where they're based on discipline, such as ABA therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, and this particular authorization is only for ABA therapy, then you may choose to select the ABA therapy appointment type. Note that the appointment types for your center may not be set up in this manner. This is because every center has the ability to create their own custom appointment types in the way that they wish to organize them. Next, let's discuss the Allow Overbooking checkbox. When unchecked, the system will not allow you to attach an authorization to an appointment if the authorization is expired. An expired authorization means that either the expiration date is in the past, or the authorized visits or authorized minutes have all been used. If Allow Overbooking is checked, then the system still will allow you to attach that authorization to an appointment even if it is expired. There are certain scenarios where this may come in handy. The last fields that we'll discuss on the authorization are the diagnosis code fields. Note that these are not commonly selected on an authorization. These are to be used if the insurance company authorizes a specific procedure code, diagnosis code combination. For example, if the insurance company authorizes H2019 with a combination diagnosis code of F84.0, then you may choose to enter in the diagnosis code here. Again, this is optional and not commonly done. Now that we've covered all of the fields on the new authorization screen, let's save this authorization and learn how to use the authorization in the day-to-day activities of your center. Note that I can review the authorization information at any point by opening up the student record, scrolling down to the authorization section, and then by clicking on the authorization. Note that on the authorization detail screen shown here, I'm able to see a balances section. The balances section lets me see the balances of either the visits or the units. For example, in the case of a visit-based authorization, I'd be able to see the total authorized visits, how many used visits, how many remaining visits, and how many visits are scheduled. For units-based authorizations, I'm able to see the total authorized minutes, the used minutes, the remaining minutes, and the scheduled minutes. These balances will update when the authorization is scheduled and when the authorization is used. Now, let's transition the lesson to the scheduling portion of authorizations. This is very important. When an appointment is created, the appropriate authorization needs to be attached to the appointment in order for the balances to count down. Now, this is a fairly simple process. On the new appointment screen shown here, there's a field with a lookup to select the appropriate authorization. To attach the authorization to the appointment, I'm simply going to press the lookup next to the authorization field, which is going to display any of the active authorizations for this particular student. In this scenario, you can see that this particular student has 2 active authorizations. I'm going to ensure that I select the appropriate one for this type of appointment. When this appointment is saved, the authorization is now attached to the appointment. The balance on the authorization will be reduced by the 150-minute duration for this appointment in the Scheduled Minutes field. However, if I want to reduce the authorization by a different amount than the duration shown here on the appointment, then I would check the Use Applied Minutes checkbox, and then I would enter in the differing time here in the Applied Minutes field. Now, if the session duration happens to differ from the duration of the appointment, then the session duration will automatically be copied into the Applied Minutes field here on the appointment. In other words, when the session is created and the time in and time out of the session are recorded, the duration of that session will automatically populate here in the Applied Minutes field. This ensures that the appropriate and correct duration is reduced from the authorization balance based on the session time in and time out fields. So let's demonstrate what happens next. I'm going to go ahead and uncheck the Use Applied Minutes checkbox for now, and I'm going to go ahead and save the appointment. Before we create the session, let's take a look at the authorization that's attached to this appointment. An easy way to view the authorization information is to click on the appointment, then click the View button. From there, I can click on the authorization link, which will take me directly to the authorization. Looking down at the Balances section, you can see that the scheduled minutes has increased to 150 and the remaining minutes has decreased to 2,850. The Used Minutes field remains at 0 as this authorization has not technically been used yet. Now let's go back to the calendar and create the session. Now to reiterate what was stated earlier, if the time in and time out differs from the time in and time out on the appointment, it will be adjusted here. So for example, let's say that the student arrived 15 minutes late and the session went 30 minutes long. you can see that the billable minutes changed from 150 to 165. Now the 165 is the amount that technically should be decreased from the authorization. So when the session is saved, the billable minutes of 165 will automatically be updated into the allowable minutes field on the appointment, and therefore the authorization will count down by the appropriate number of minutes. Next, let's scroll down to the coding section of the session. Notice that the procedures are already added to the sessions. This occurs when the authorization contains a procedure code, the authorization is attached to the appointment, and the session is created from that appointment. In this scenario, the system already knows the procedure code to select on the session and, based on the time in and time out, already knows the appropriate unit calculation as well. Also note that the authorization that we used for this particular appointment was the T-code example from earlier in the lesson. If you recall, we only entered the base code on the authorization. However, the system is smart enough to know that since it's a T-code, that the session also needs the secondary code added. So in this scenario, it automatically added the 0360T and the 0361T with the appropriate number of units. So let's go ahead and save this session and go back to the authorization and take a look at what the balances look like now. Before we look at the authorization, let's first look at the appointment associated to the session. Notice that the applied minutes field on the appointment automatically updated to the 165 minutes from the session. Next, we'll open up the authorization, and scrolling down to the balances, you can see that the 165 minutes is now used, and the remaining visits is 2,835. So, as a simplified summary of the authorization process in TotalABA, you'll first enter the authorization information into the student record. Next, ensure that the authorization is attached to all of the appropriate appointments. As the sessions are created, the updated minutes will automatically decrease from the authorization. In addition to seeing the balances on the individual authorization, custom authorization reports can be created under the Reports section. The Reports system in TotalABA uses the Salesforce.com reports system. You'll want to get familiar with reports in TotalABA, and you can do so by learning the Salesforce reporting engine. You can find several online tutorials for Salesforce reports simply by doing a web search on Salesforce Reports tutorial. This concludes the TotalABA Authorizations training video. Thank you for watching.